Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MR Podcast. The MR Podcast is available on all mainstream radio platforms. Make sure you follow or subscribe to never miss any of our many episodes. Today's special episode will be titled, Speaking with Dr. Froswa Drew on Building Relationships Within Networks and Communities. And our guest for today, as you can carefully assume from the title, is Froswa Drew. Thank you for being with us today on the podcast, Dr. Drew.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So describing Dr. Drew is an honor. This woman is very inspiring to a young African-American girl like myself. Let me begin. Dr. Drew is the Vice President of Community Affairs and Strategic Alliances, the co-founder of Heritage Giving Circle, Diversity Ambassador for the Red Cross, and as well, she is an author and a speaker. She received her PhD from Antioch University in Leadership and Change with a focus on social capital and relational leadership. Like I said, there is so much more I can say about this inspiring lady, but last and not least, Dr. Drew is the author of 3 books, Fly Away, Ready for a Revolution, 30 Days to Jolt Your Life, and Rules of Engagement, Making Connection. So in this particular episode on the MR Podcast, we will be for each and every one of us during these challenging times, and it is important that we discuss the things we might have once been ignoring and turning a blind eye to. The truth will set us free. And with Dr. Drew today, we will discuss everything from building networks, communities, partnerships, educational programs, community development, and leadership. Okay. Do you ever think about how the world needs more people with a mentor mentality? People of all kinds and backgrounds that are willing to care unselfishly about other people, support people, teach people, and serve people. Well, the truth is, as human beings, we all have a potential and purpose. That potential and purpose extends to our relationships with other human beings. As the founder of Mentorship Revolution, I believe that being a mentor is not just a career, but in actuality is a person that is willing to make intentional choices, intentional sacrifices, and contribute to the world and environment through intentional actions and living. Once we learn as human beings to nurture and encourage the purpose we have as individuals, we begin to understand that we can do the same in helping others. Right now, if you are still wondering what this podcast holds or why this podcast should even be relevant, I will ease your mind by informing you that this podcast will be juicy and full of worthy news and information. The guests on this podcast will be original, unique, and experienced, so please stay tuned. So today we have the wonderful Dr. Froswa Drew with us, and as a guest, I am very honored to have her on my platform. Her resume and the work she has done and is still doing is very astounding. Welcome to the MR Podcast, Dr. Drew. How are you this evening?
I am doing well. Honored to be here with you, Hannah.
Thank you so much. I'm just honored to have you. And I know that it took time for me to reach back to let you know that I wanted, to have you. It took some time.
Life happens.
Life happens. It does. But when I looked over, you were really the perfect fit for especially the climate that just happened, that we're currently in right now. And I think that is very important because really Mentorship Revolution is a community. And the fact that you are an expert on community, I think that's great. And I'm so glad to have you. Thank you. So as you know, there has been a lot of things happening. Yes, it's been a lot of things.
A lot.
So much for us to wrap our minds around in the news, media, and current events. And I want you to provide some perspective on policing, defunding the police, and how there can be amends made, if there can be, between police and citizens.
You know, it's interesting for me because I have some very good friends that are African American police officers. And
Okay.
I think their perspective oftentimes is not a part of this conversation. And
Right.
it's something watching them having to deal with um, the racism that they experience as police officers and
Okay.
the backlash that they also deal with from the community because of the position that they're in. And
Yes.
so I think for me, I have a number of opinions about it, and there's something needs to be done. I
Yes.
think that, you know, we would be remiss to look at this time and not do something.
Right.
But what does that look like? It can be a multiple um, creation of things. I think it's going to require a lot of people to be involved. I think
Right.
it's going to require that as we talk about defunding, what does that really mean?
Yes.
Because I don't know if definitions are very clear, because for some that
Mhm.
may mean it's totally getting rid of the police department.
Eradicating.
Yes,
Right.
for others, there is this ideal of reform.
Reform.
And what does that look like to do that? And some of the concerns with that is, if the foundation is already messed up, how do you build on top of a
Yes.
foundation that's already, you know, cracked? And what,
Corrupt.
exactly. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I think it's also important to look at policing from a historical standpoint. I don't think
Okay.
we pay attention to the fact that policing started out of slavery, and that you had patty rollers who went around and made sure that Black folks had their papers, and they would harass folks whether they weren't running away or not. If you were doing your job, you were still harassed. And so I think it's important for people to understand
Okay.
the historical implications for policing and how that shows up today. And my belief is that there is going to have to be something, because we know that there are going to always be challenges. But in the current context of policing, it's not working the way that it should, especially for Black folks. And so
Right.
what it looks like, I can't sit back and go, I have the answer to it. But what I do know is it's got to change.
Yes. It has to. Well, I feel like me, speaking from the perspective of, you know, even being my age, I feel like with the police, there are, issues, and there is much police brutality going on. But I feel like, as you said, this system has been in place for so long, and in many ways, police, what they do for the communities, as you said, there are Black policemen, and what they do for the communities, it's a name for it. I can't remember. Is it called blue housing? What was it?
I'm not sure.
I think they were saying, like, there's really no such thing as a good police, because all of them are within the same, no police is going to speak against the bad police, maybe, or I don't
I
think.
understand that, but my only concern is when we make statements like that, the system may be broken and people make up the system, but then it could be said of many of us that because I work at a place that may do some things that's not correct, then does that mean that I'm a bad person because I'm in that space? No, and I want to be careful of labeling folks. It's the system and it's the policies, and yes, there are people that uphold that, and they need to be held accountable. No question about that. But and I've heard that argument. I guess for me, it's one of those things of, we have to do something, and what that looks like from the outside looking in, it's very hard for me to go, it's gonna look like this. What I do know is it has to
Okay.
look different, because it is not working. I think our communities need more housing. It's ridiculous that people cannot get affordable housing.
Yes,
It is
that's ridiculous.
ridiculous that people do not have access to mental health care, and that they are punished when the issue is mental health, and yet they're being tossed into jail. That's problematic. The sentencing that we have, where we have people who are going to jail that are Black, who do the same crime as someone who's white, and they spend more time in jail. When you look at the overpopulation of African Americans and Black folks in the criminal justice system is problematic. So there are a lot of issues that have to be addressed. And I don't think that it's a one size fits all solution, because it is going to require the involvement of folks and communities to decide what it looks like for their community. And it can't be something that government is solely responsible for deciding. People need to be at the table and involved and co-create and reimagine what possibilities could look like that benefit Black folks, but benefit the entire community. And I think what people miss out on is, you know, I get so frustrated when people get upset about Black Lives Matter. The reality is that when our lives do matter, then we can say our lives matter. But it doesn't diminish other people's existence when we call out, because proof shows that obviously we're not valued in the same way that other communities are valued. And so I think it's a real opportunity around policing, around what communities can look like if we bring folks to the table and create a new table and start doing some things that are beneficial.
Yes. So, well, we know that there needs to be a solution, because police brutality all around is wrong. You know, there's no way that it can be excused, because now another argument that we hear often is just obey the police. Like,
that's respectability politics. That doesn't work.
That doesn't work, because if you're dealing with a racist, if you encounter a racist, just because you know, you're still going to be Black, you know.
Oh, I had a situation happen to me where I was in February. I was visiting my daughter who's in college, and I was driving back, and the police officer was going slower than I was. So I jumped in front of him. Lights come on. I went, oh, okay, here we go. I'm going to rent a car. And his whole thing was, well, there's no front license plate on the rental. I said, well, I'm turning it back in tomorrow. Yeah. He accuses me of drinking when it was hand sanitizer on the floor, and he smelled that. And I was like, how do you not know the difference between hand sanitizer and alcohol? But what I went through, questioning, you know, how old was my car at home, and all these different things that I'm sitting there going, and I was thinking, I have a PhD, don't have any problems, never broke the law. And I started making some phone calls and got an investigation open. And I thought in that moment, most people don't have that kind of access to be able to even do that, out the leadership and say that it's problematic. How many people have gone through that same level of harassment, and because they had warrants or tickets were terrified and thrown into jail? And I recognize how fortunate I was, but how many people who look like me don't have that same opportunity? But my point is that if that can happen to me,
it can happen to anyone.
It happens to everybody. And so and I had to put a post up on Facebook about it, because it's like, for my white friends, I need you to understand that this isn't something that happens to Black people because they're bad or they resist. You can just be driving your car on your way home, wanting to get home safely, and still have that same kind of situation.
Well, I must say, now I have lived 2 decades, so I have a little bit of history. And I must say that it wasn't until, now I did grow up in the South. So, you know, sometimes the region or the area you grew up in and the exposure you have plays a part. But I do remember, like, for a while, it seems like some people were thinking that racism had disappeared or evened out. Because because I've always been into media, like always watching, you know, reading, watching TV, paying attention to news. And it seems like before Trayvon Martin, like 2012, I know that sparked, you know, things started happening. But doesn't it seem like before then, a lot of these things, like between that decade of 2000, maybe you can tell me, were those things still being discussed? Because I feel like, but I feel like on a larger platform, Black people, and like when you look at the 90s, you know, it was still, you know, police brutality was happening then. You had the same police issues, but it seemed like between 2000 and that 2012, there wasn't like social media hadn't yet started.
Well, that's part of the problem.
Okay.
Is that I think for a couple of things, you know, I think it was, you didn't have people filming with phones. And
Okay.
so, you know, my mother tells a story. My mother's in her 70s, and she was talking about when she was a young woman, how she remembers this young man being beaten by the police, beaten to death. And, you know, I remember Rodney King, and
Right.
there has always been these stories, but they never got the attention. And it's the same thing with, you know, George Floyd and what happened with his death. Is I was blown away by people being so, you know, just bewildered by his death, when I was going, well, Atiana got killed in her house, and Bob
Right.
John got killed in his house right before. And, you know, I was naming off all these people, Sandra Bland and Eric,
Yes.
you know, and it's all these people that this is not new in our community. But I think what happened with the situation for George Floyd was people actually saw it happen on camera. And
Right.
they saw him dying on camera. Whereas with Atiana, you heard about it. And with Botham, you heard about it, but you didn't actually see it. So it was easy for people to go, oh, that's over there. That doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And because of the pandemic, I think all of us are at home. You can't run away and ignore it. So it's in your face nonstop. So it
Yes.
forces people to do something. But I think to your point, it has always happened. I don't think you had access to video on it. And then secondly, for your generation, I remember when Trump got elected, and I was I thought that night that it was going to be a different outcome. So I went to bed, and I woke up, and my daughter was crying hysterically, and she was, you know, much younger. And she was crying hysterically because she was, oh my God, the world is going to end. It's such a bad thing. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking, oh my God, all your life, or most of your formative years, you've had Obama.
Obama.
So for you all, it's been, we can. And, you know,
Yes.
and it's been such positivity. And you were told
Yes.
that there was this post-racial society, which was a lie, because
Right.
you saw how his wife was being called out of her name, and, you know, and all these things attributed him, and then, you know, his citizenship. And so he was still being berated even as president. And so for your generation, even though that was happening, it was, oh my God, we got this Black president. Life has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I never expected in my lifetime to even happen. And so I
Yes.
had such history of watching racism happen that it's not surprising, because it's been
Right.
such a part of my life. And for you all, you've had 8 years of your life of this amazing man, and then all of
Yeah.
a sudden you get who you got now, and you're going,
Right.
oh, what's going on?
Yeah.
That's what has happened.
Right. Shock.
Yes,
You got shock
yes.
value. Yeah.
Y'all are like, oh my God, what just happened? You know, and it's not
Yeah.
to say that all of us that are my age and older don't care, or that we're apathetic to it. I think what has happened is, as you get older, you begin to start seeing the pendulum swing. And
Yes.
that, you know, I've been under a lot of presidents, and I've seen a lot of craziness, and then, you know, you thought one was crazy, and you look back and go, he really wasn't that bad compared to what I'm looking at. Wow, I didn't know it could get like that. You know, and so I think what has happened is, because you've been able to witness some history, that you understand that the pendulum swings like this,
Yes, it
and not
does.
just right, but it gives you perspective, and helps you understand that, one, we can't go to sleep. We cannot get comfortable just because you get somebody who looks like you in office. You can't get
Right.
comfortable. We still got to be marching. We still got to have strategy. We still have to continue to work together, because when we don't, you have these folks who show up because they've been strategizing and planning too. And we have
Right.
to look at it.
Yes. And I do think that while we're on this topic, inclusivity is, I think that's important, especially because we live in a diversified, America right now. But I do think that for a while, do you think the Black community, there has been many things, do you think, that has divided our community, which I want to talk more about that. So I know, like you said, you can't give a one fit all, but what do you think has contributed? Do you think racism has contributed to the division of our community, or at least oppression, maybe?
Oh, it's multiple variables. I think it's all of what you said. I think our community, there has always been division in our community. And I'm often saying to young people, y'all, that's not new. You had a woman who tried to stab Martin Luther King.
Okay.
You know, you've had this consistency of people having differences of opinion. I think as Black folk, we have to be okay in knowing that we're not a monolithic people. We're not all the same. As you said earlier, you grew up in the South, and so did I. I grew up in Louisiana. And I have very different experiences that shape who I am compared to folks that I meet here in Texas. So I think that we have to be okay in knowing that we all may not agree on how things get done, but for the most part, the solution is the same. And I think that there are some folks who are not going to ever fall into that, and they have their own, opinions and agendas, and that's okay too.
Right.
I think it's important to find your tribe and begin to work. And as you do that and build momentum and bring more people into those spaces, I think that we have to focus more on who's in and who wants to do some work, then focus on those folks who are the outliers who decide to, say some of the stuff that they say. And y'all's generation,
Yes.
y'all, I won't name the person, but there's a young person who gets on Twitter and who does a whole lot, and everybody gets incensed. And it's like, but you got to know those people are gonna exist.
Yes, overreacting.
Yes, they serve a purpose.
Right.
Recognize that. Do not allow that to get you distracted, because quite frankly, that can be a distraction from doing the real work. And so
It is.
let them do what they do.
Right.
You know what needs to be done, and you work and find those people who are in a agreement with you and do the work.
That is very mature.
I'm old though.
Yes.
but I had to learn that too. I was involved on my campus when I was president of NAACP when I was in college. And I remember that there were groups who didn't necessarily agree with what, paths we took or what we, decided to focus on. But they understood that what we were trying to get to was a solution that they wanted. And they had different things that they thought were important. It didn't invalidate what my view was or what their view was, but we were all working toward making sure that Black students on campus had, the same opportunities that everybody else had. They just saw a different way to do it. I think we have to be okay with knowing that that's going to be a part of this. It's okay.
Right. That is okay. And before we move on from talking about social issues, I want to also ask, because as far as we know, police will be around, so we can't completely always predict who's going to be the next person. But I would like to ask, what do you think all citizens should know? Are there any such thing as how you should interact with the police? What is it that they should know about interacting with the police to make it as much of a civil encounter?
It's hard for me to even have that conversation because there are people who've done that.
Right, there are.
You look at Elijah, the young man who died in 2019 in Colorado. And what that young man was saying in the transcript, he was being so kind.
Yes.
And he was being so thoughtful. And it broke my heart to listen to his last words. He was doing everything right.
Yes.
So even if we tell folks, be polite, make sure your hands are, even when you do all of that, you still have these situations. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to say that you walk in and create a stir, because, folks are going to get defensive. That's with anybody.
You're right.
But it's one of those things where it's hard to go, if you do this, check, it's going to end up okay. Because we've seen examples where that hasn't happened.
Yes. That is right.
So it's kind of like, I'm sorry, I really don't have an answer in that, because, people go, well, don't resist. That young man wasn't resisting.
Right.
And so it's like, I can't tell you what is a safe way to do it, because just based on what we've seen, it depends what officer you get. I've had some. It
does depend.
And I had no problems. And I've had others, like the one I mentioned, that I had to go and report and take it up to some higher levels. So you just don't know what you're going to get. And that's sad that you have to be on edge. I mean, when you think about the psychological impact, as much as officers are scared, and I get that people are frightened and all that, people have to understand that we too have that anxiety because of what we've gone through, and that we're terrified too, because I want to go home just like you want to go home to your family, so do I. And I think in somewhere, somehow, that we have begun to start labeling everybody as being the same. And because of that, you miss out on real opportunities to see that not everybody is the same person. And you can't make decisions about me based on what I look like. Because you miss out on the totality of who I am by me. And I know in that split second, they've got to make some quick decisions. But it's like I told the officer who stopped me, not all of us that are driving cars are doing something that we're not supposed to be doing.
Right.
And you can't make that assumption that because I'm doing this, that I'm doing something wrong.
Right.
And if you do that, then apply it to everybody else.
Right. And I do think that behind assumptions lies fear.
Yes.
And that's often the case.
But those are stereotypes. And it's not to say that you shouldn't have, and that kind of job, I understand that it has to be frightening and scary. I've never been an officer, so it's hard for me to speak on being in those situations. And I won't try to say I totally understand. But at the same time, it's not fair to the folks like a George Floyd and Atiana and others who, because of your fear, they lost their lives.
Yes.
Incidents that didn't require that to even happen.
It didn't.
It shouldn't have even, Brianna, that shouldn't have happened.
It shouldn't have. So now we're going to discuss community building, community development, and community initiatives. So Dr. Drew, it is important that we start this discussion first defining community. We all in some shape or form have an idea what community is and what it looks like. But it is tremendously important that people know what community stands for and what it represents. So what is community and what does community represent?
To me, community, it can look a lot of different ways. Community can be your family and having a sense of connection with the people that you live with. Community can be a group of people who look like you, or think like you, or your job can be a community. So I think wherever there are folks that are in spaces and sharing spaces together, that's where you can begin to define community. I think where people get confused is they see community as unity. And sometimes those aren't
right. I thought that too.
Yeah, it's not always the same, because you live in a community of people that are your neighbors, and it may not be that you know them or even necessarily agree with them. So I think that we have to be careful of assuming that community always turns into this ideal of unity. We'd like that, and in some instances it can, but that's not necessarily, in my opinion, the case all the time. Because you're sharing space does not mean that necessarily you're in agreement.
Right, that is true. In many ways, so do you think, now that you mentioned that, do you think that unity can be a goal for every community, or is that kind of impossible?
I don't think it's impossible. I think it can be a goal, but I think that it starts with having a shared language. I think that whenever you're in relationship, it's easy to make assumptions about what we agree on. And so I think in the beginning of any community building, it's having this shared language and a shared way of how we respect each other. And what's important to me and what's important to you. I think that's how you build community. At the core of community is trust. And so if we don't have trust with each other, we can share these spaces together. But if I don't trust you, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're in unity with each other. We're just sharing space. And so I think that we have to work on creating these spaces that are safe, where people can be authentic, and that we can begin to build trust with each other, knowing that trust doesn't mean agreement either. We can trust each other, and I think we have to be okay with the tension in relationships of not agreeing. And I think sometimes we feel like because people disagree, there can't be unity. I can disagree with you, and we can still work.
They're against us. Right, we see them as an enemy.
And that's not necessarily true. And that's that. And in some cases, depending on what that is, it could be that your idea hurts me. And so I don't know if I can trust you because you're doing something that hurts me. That's one way. But there are other things where we may disagree on, how we do something. that doesn't mean that we can't work together. And I think we have to be careful of that. I think for your generation as well, one of the things that blows me away is this cancel society. That when somebody does something wrong, it's like, cancel them. We're not going to deal with them anymore. I can't see, X celebrity because she said this. Well, you have to be mindful of canceling people, because just as you want grace, and when you mess up, because you are going to, and you want grace and forgiveness and mercy for that, we got to be cool about always canceling people. That doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable and they're not responsible for saying stupid stuff in their actions. But I also think that we need to be very careful of throwing people away, because that to me is what my concern is with canceling folks, because they don't agree with ideas and they are not doing what community wants them to do. Then we throw them away because we say they have no value, and that's dangerous.
That is dangerous, and I think that that isn't virtuous behavior. I think kind of differently, but I don't think that that's virtuous to throw another human being away just because, just because they have done something that. But at the same time, I do think that when it comes to, do you often mean like the celebrities?
Yeah, when I see people do that with celebrities, because ex-celebrity says something stupid. There have been a few lately, one who keeps saying something stupid that's very popular. And people are like, I'm done with them.
Right.
Well, I understand I may not support them financially. You have the right to do that. But to completely throw people away and not give them a chance to change, I want those opportunities when I mess up for people to say, yeah, you messed up bad, girl. You need to work on that, and give me the opportunity to change, because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. Now, again, there are other people that, and I'll say this, I won't even say other people. People have to be held accountable and responsible. So if you're saying things that are dangerous, you do have to be held accountable. And I think that cancel culture takes it a little bit further. Instead of just holding people accountable and giving them room to grow, what we say is, we're not fooling with you ever again. And it doesn't give people an opportunity to redeem themselves. So I can say, you go in timeout. I'm cool with that. Put people on timeout. Tell them, hey, we're not going to fool with you for a while, but the fold is open. You can come back in. But sometimes we make it where, especially when they're saying just dumb stuff, they don't know what they don't know.
Now, if I could, I would say that that's often done. Just knowing my peers through experiences that I know, being around them and sharing similar, time and all that with them. I would say that often I question the motives of people that use social media immaturely, because I use it in my eyes maturely, but I think some people, like when they do that cancel culture, I do think sometimes like what they're doing is uncalled for. Now, I don't think that, I can understand your argument about why cancel culture is wrong, but often they do those things for attention. So I'm going to be honest, I really feel like when it comes to some of those things that are done immaturely, I just rather not even know it exists.
Well, and I think but you said that's the answer. Because then when you feed into that and you go off and everybody starts, tweeting back at them, you give them more publicity than they actually deserve. And for many people, that's what they're looking for is the opportunity to get even more publicity from it. So I think it's, and you said it well, I think it's using wisdom and discernment. And I think you have to decide, is this a situation that requires me to go off about what these people are doing? Or do I look at it and go, it's not even worth my time to make a comment, because it's not one way or the other. And I think it's learning to use your time wisely, because one thing what we do know is, like, right now it's 12:36 on the 30th of June. We will never get this time back, ever. We'll never have the 30th of June 2020 at 12:36.
We will not.
And so it's learning to use your time and the spaces that you're in wisely, even as community, being a part of communities that are going to embrace you and love you and help build with you. That's where you put your time in, and you have to use wisdom and discernment to know that every community may not be a fit for you, but finding those places that you maximize your talent and your time are going to be where you want to put your resource into.
I completely agree. And as well, you have shared with us what community means, which, as you said, community is usually where there is something that you're sharing with other people, something that you have alike with those people. So tell us the firm beliefs that you personally have about community and its importance in every sector of life.
Relationships are what make up communities. And I think that's so important that as we go through this season that we're in and we're on Zoom calls all the time, that even though we are being told to socially distance, I don't like that terminology because we're physically distancing. You can still have community in the midst of Zoom. And I think it's important for us to think about relationships are the key to community and how do we build those relationships. And so for me, that is what I live for and do is I see the value in what people bring to the table. And I think we have to, even in communities, there's something called asset-based community development that basically says that in every community, there are these 5 assets that exist, one of them being people. I think we have to start looking at people and the places we live in from an asset lens versus looking at it from this deficit-based lens. There is a lot wrong in our communities, granted, but there are a lot of assets and resources that exist. And we have to begin to start seeing that in people and in the places we're in and bringing those things to the table versus always focusing on what we don't have. I just took a group through this activity to have them really think about, in every community, they say that the assets they are, individuals, it's the local economy. So your businesses, it's open space and the physical space, your parks, and walking trails. Then the other piece is association and then institutions. I don't care how poor community is, all of those things exist. We got to start looking at what we do have and then begin to start building those things that are working in our communities and putting resources into those things. And it's going to require relationships to do that. And we've got to change the lens. And that's what I try to do. Even when I see places that have such blight and don't have as much, there are assets even in those people. And that's why we can't throw people away, because the solution that we may need may lie in another person. And so
you never know that person.
We can't throw them away because they have what we need to solve whatever the challenge is. And so for me, relationships are key to everything, and building community and making change. We have to work with each other.
And by you mentioning that relationships are like the key ingredients to communities, would you also say that the breakdown of relationships can also lead to the breakdown of communities?
Oh, definitely. That's an excellent correlation. It is. When there's the breakdown in communication, because relationships typically break because there's a communication breakdown.
Okay.
And so when we aren't doing the shared language, and I'm so interested in my stuff,
my point,
and I don't care about your stuff.
Right.
I'm recognizing if you're not good, I'm not good either. And so there's a breakdown in communication. Relationships are going to break, and as a result, communities are going to be broken because then I don't have resources.
Right.
I don't know who to go to. It's like I told you the story about with the police officer. It was because I had a friend who was in a position who opened up doors to some very high level people, but it was relationship that did that. And I think about people who don't have relationships and they got to call all these numbers and get redirected to this person and how frustrating it is. So you have a lot of people in our society who are frustrated because they can't get resources. And it's because relationships aren't in place. And we don't value people, so we go, well, that's their fault. When no, we created these systems that make it difficult. It makes it so difficult for them to access and get what they need. And what would it look like in a world where people really did talk to each other and had trust? Can you imagine the flow of resources and how that would change the way our communities would look?
Right. So if you can also please share because I believe in this myself. Can you share with us how parents and caretakers play a role in instilling a positive attitude towards community and being involved instead of feeling isolated? This is especially important for adolescents and even elderly who are more prone to depression or maybe feeling like they have a place that they do not fit and belong.
I think being in this pandemic has isolated a lot of us from each other.
Right.
Because, I was telling a friend of mine, I did not realize how much I missed being in the presence of people. I miss
Okay.
hugs. Even though my family is here, I love hugging, my friends, and I love,
Yes.
in proximity to them, and I miss that so much right now. And as much as I talk about relationships, it was really for me like this eye opener of wow, just being in the presence of someone makes a difference for my mood and just feeling connected. I think even though we can't do that in the same way we used to, there's still things that you can do as a young person. You can volunteer. There's some low risk opportunities where it's things like how do you go, and help senior citizens who can't go to the grocery store and shouldn't? How do you drop
Yes.
things, for them to be able to get food? How do you send letters and write letters and slide it under your neighbor's door that says, hey, just checking on you, hope you're okay, send me an email if you need something? I think that there are things that we can still do, even virtually, that
Okay.
allow us to feel connected and people don't feel isolated. Calling folks and checking on them and seeing if they're okay, or sending text messages. I think it requires being intentional. And to your point about parents, I think parents model for their children what responsibility looks like, what value of other people looks like. And so if you say community is important, then that's something that you have to demonstrate with your kids. I have friends now that, I'm so blown away with how they're taking their kids to protests and they're taking their kids to meetings. They got their mask on, and they're practicing their social distancing. But I am so proud of how they have taken
Okay.
their kids along, and they're modeling for their children what's important and what's valuable. So whatever you spend the most time in doing, that's where your value is. And you've got to be mindful that your children are paying attention to that and watching you. So nothing wrong with working. We got to work. We got to be able to eat and support our homes. But if we say relationships are valuable, then we have to model that for our children and teach them how people matter by the way we treat people.
I agree with that. I do agree that parents do, they kind of like that bedrock in a way. I do agree with that. Let's think about. Okay. So I think we've already spoke about this a little bit in the beginning, but I think it's interesting as we look at community and its meaning. I really don't think you can change the meaning of community. It's going to always be that common location, common interest, common thought. But it is interesting as we see how much community has changed and transformed in the last century, since the 20th century. So, can you speak with us more about how community has changed in the most recent decades and what younger generations need to know about community that they may not even be aware of?
Well, I think it's changed because of technology. Technology has created all of these other places that we now have relationships in. Like what we're doing now, that's
Right.
building relationship. And I've been so fortunate because even during Zoom, and I've been telling people this is the time to leverage relationships because folks are at home.
Okay.
So, how do you send emails to people that you'd like to meet and get to know? This is the time to really begin to start looking at
Yes.
leveraging that. But there are all these groups on Meetup, and Facebook has all these groups, and so there are real opportunities that you have now that didn't exist, a century ago, and it's more global. So
Global.
there's this global thing, as I hear going on, where you have local relationships, but you also have these global communities because of technology that brings people so much closer together. And that's where the change has happened over decades of time. Is just because technology has advanced and allowed us to do that more. So that's really the only difference. I would say, to the second part of your question about what do young people need to know, I think the thing that has not changed is all of us were wired to be in community. We were designed, whether you're a person of faith or not, we were all designed and wired to be in community. We were not designed to be in isolation. And so I
Okay.
think it's important for young people to recognize that as much as you can do by yourself, you can do a whole lot, but you can go a whole lot further when you're in community with people. And so, I often tell young people it's two folks that you need in your life. You need mentors. You need people, and there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And young people sometimes focus so much on the mentor that they don't think about the sponsor. The mentor is a person who's giving you advice and who's talking to you and telling you their wisdom. They're not opening doors for you. A sponsor
Okay.
is somebody who opens a door, who calls and says, hey, I know Hannah, she's doing great work. Let me, put my credibility on the line for Hannah to get this opportunity. And we miss out. And I think when you're young, because I didn't even know this, I didn't know the difference between the two. And I think for young people, it is making sure that you create your own personal board of directors. You should have the 5, 6 people in your life who hold you accountable, who you go to them. They have skills that you don't have, that they speak into your life. So you need to make sure you have your own personal board of directors, because these are folks that can serve also as mentors, but hopefully they can be sponsors too. And you need that to advance, because what we do know is you can have an amazing GPA, you can have great grades, but when you have relationship combined with those things, doors can open in ways that they may have not had before.
That is true. And as well, I like the idea that you said create your own personal board of directors and the idea of sponsor, because this is things that I'm kind of hearing differently for the first time. So, but I really am enjoying this discussion.
So am I.
Thank you. So, Dr. Drew, I know this is your field. Speaking about community, speaking about networking, this is your field. So, what discussions do you find yourself having most these days about networking, diversity, and community issues? If you want to talk about 2020, you can, but broader wise, what discussions do you find yourself having about these topics?
Talking about racial equity and making sure that folks are at the table who have historically not been in that space. I do a lot in philanthropy. And so part of
Okay.
my role is I work with organizations in our Dallas community, and we fund them. So last year in 2019, we funded over 60 organizations, almost $500,000. And most of these organizations, I would say over 80–90% of them were led by people of color. And for me, it's looking at how do we change the narrative in philanthropy so that organizations that are on the front lines are getting the resources that they need to do the work. So often what we see in philanthropy is that the big organizations, I won't name them, but you know them,
Yes.
because they have research and development folks that are out there asking for money. They've got glossy brochures and they're taking pictures. They are the ones who get the resource, and yet we see some of our smaller nonprofits and mid-sized nonprofits, especially in Black and Brown communities, not getting access to resources in the same way. So I've been spending a lot of my time having conversations about making sure that these organizations are at the table, that they are part of our communities, and that they're doing good work. And even though they may not have the big departments and all of these resources, it does not negate the work that they're doing. So I spend a lot of time advocating and connecting our community nonprofits to resources, because they usually are so busy doing the work, they don't know who to talk to quite often. And so I started doing this call during COVID, where I brought together a lot of our small, mid-sized nonprofits, and I do it about twice a month, because what I noticed was they were so busy doing the work, they didn't know each other. So it's a call for them to talk about, hey, you got food? Okay, well, I got clothes. Well, let's do some stuff together. And to watch the collaborations that have happened in our community because of them just having space to share was huge. And then it was for me talking to funders that I work with and saying, hey, I need you to pay attention to these groups because they deserve it. And so I spent a lot of time really trying to get folks to think about these narratives we tell about communities, that we look at Black and brown communities as broken. No, they're not. The systems that were created have broken our communities, but the people are not broken. The people have ideas, they have expertise, they haven't been given opportunity to talk about what they can do.
Right.
And one of the things that I've shared with people is when I started in my position, I went around and listened. I think the mistake happens is we feel like we know communities so well that we come up with these solutions for them and then wonder why it doesn't work. Even in the policing conversation, community has to be at the table because they're impacted and affected by it. And I think we create these programs in isolation of the people that are impacted by it and then wonder why they don't show up or why they're mad about it because you didn't ask them. They could have told you what they needed. And so I spend a lot of time listening to the people in the communities that I am serving and working in. And I feel like I'm a bridge, that my job is to not only hear what they're saying and help them with resources, but connect other funders to them and look at ways that we can make sure they're getting the support that they need. So that's what I find myself in a lot of conversations around equity.
Now, this is a little light on subject, but I know that does this get exhausting?
Yes,
It
it does. It gets exhausting. And I think for me, it's been exhausting because, as I mentioned, I was doing this kind of work in college in the 90s.
Okay.
And so, you've been fighting for a bit. And it does get exhausting because sometimes you go, we still doing this? Oh my God, it's 2020 and we're still having these conversations. And yet I still see so much hope and promise. I
Yeah, it
still
takes
see
hope.
so much goodness that happens. I've
Yes.
seen change happen that's been positive. And so for me, even though it gets exhausting, you can't give up. And, the name of your podcast is so important because we have to mentor. And I spent a lot of my time mentoring younger women and men, trying to
Okay.
do this kind of download of information because I don't want y'all to make the mistakes that I've made or that we've made. And I think when we are more intentional about sharing that information and
Sharing.
distributing that power, um,
Yes.
and making sure that you all can then move into positions and accelerate and not have to go through some of the crap that we went through, it makes such a difference. And that's why mentoring and having these intercultural, not even intercultural, I said the wrong word, but having intergenerational conversations are so
Right.
important
It is.
because that's where the information is shared. Just like I may be telling you new terms, you're teaching me. And we have to create more spaces for us to have these conversations with each other so that you all can move even faster than what we were able to do, because now you got technology, you got resource in ways that I didn't have when I was in my 20s. So we are wrong if we don't do that for y'all. We have to, and that's why I'm committed to doing it.
Right. And as well as you talk about this, I think it's important that you mention the intergenerational part. Do you think that generational gaps, how do we face those? Because they do exist in some ways, but maybe you can talk more about that generational gaps and how that has to be addressed.
It has to be addressed. I think it's several things that, are the issue with intergenerational stuff. I look at much older Black people, and sometimes I get concerned because they're not willing to share power. They hold on to stuff real tight. And then I had to understand that for many of them, they fought to get in those positions.
Work so hard.
They work so hard that once they arrive, so to speak, they were like, I'm gonna hold on this till I die.
Yeah.
And so I get it, but it's like, but y'all, what you're doing is you're not multiplying. So what does it look like when a person pours pieces of themselves into all of these people, that you create this army, so to speak? You have multiplied your legacy. And I think it's helping old folks as well as young folks think about legacy. And I was telling somebody recently, one of the most empowering things I've ever done was I wrote my obituary. A friend of mine challenged me to write my obituary, and I thought it was morbid and gross. I was like, oh, I'm not ready to die. I don't want to put that out in the universe.
Right.
But it was the most impactful thing I've done because it made me think about what my life should look like. If I want to have this said about me when I die, then how do I need to live now for that to be a reality? We all have to start thinking about the legacy that we are going to create for others that come behind us. And why would I want you all to walk into spaces and you have to go through all the stuff that I went through, and it continues to delay our progress, not only as individuals, but as people. And it's not fair to put you all in those positions. I think I'm the way that I am is because when I was in my 20s and I was just starting in my career, I had a lot of people wouldn't give me the time of day. They didn't think I was important. You know, I didn't have the title, you know, and they wouldn't even see me. And it used to hurt my feelings because I wanted them to just let me get a little wisdom. And, you know, even if they give me 15 minutes, I understand you're busy. They wouldn't even do that. And I vowed that I would not be that chick. That as I got older, that I was going to always be the person that made sure that young women had some access, even though I'm super busy. I try to make time for young women to have access because I know what that's like and how the folks who did that for me, it transformed who I was. And then when they got older and they needed something, I was more apt to go, yeah, you know, because you blessed my life versus those who you didn't have nothing to do with me. And now you're going, oh, I want to talk to her. And I'm going, but you didn't feel that way about me before. What's up with that? I think we have to treat people the way that we want to be treated. And it's important for intergenerational conversations to happen. But I think at the core that we all got to think about what is legacy and what do we want for the next generation? How do we want them to be better? And if we want that, then we got to work together to do it.
And as well, I think church is a common place where you find those generational gaps.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And, you know, in our African American churches, but I want to say as well, do you think, what is it that sometimes we feel like competitiveness? Is that what it is? Even the generations?
Yeah, it is. It's a couple of things. It's one, I didn't have power in the world. So I may not have had the big fancy job out in the world, but when I came to church, I became the head usher. And so I'm important, you know, I'm the lead singer of the choir. So I feel like I have some power.
Right.
And I people sometimes, I'm just like, are you serious? We're going to trip about this?
Yeah, but they're not thinking long term.
Right. But
I
had to sit back and go, well, part of that is that when people don't feel that they have power in their lives, those spaces that they can grab some, they will. And so church for Black people has been a sanctuary because Black folks have not had access to leadership opportunities until, you know, I'd say the last couple of decades, you've seen more and more Black people that have had access to leadership opportunities. Your generation has even more of them. But for many of those old folks at our churches, they never had those. And so part of it is that when they get the power, they hang on to it. And then for some people, it is competitiveness because they look at their youth and they go, oh my goodness, I didn't get to do this, 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 and this. And so they're resentful because they see younger people who are doing those things. And what I've had to remind some of folks that I know who are older is your world is different. You didn't have the same opportunity. So how can you be jealous of them when
it's not your lack, it's not lack of who you are, it's just timing.
It's just a decade. You I look at young people now and I'm like, oh my God, you're a vice president at, 35? That didn't happen for me because when I was 35, those opportunities weren't necessarily as available as they are now. I talk about nonprofit management because I've spent so much time in that space, but when I came into nonprofit management, there was no degree program. Y'all got degrees now, and I just learned it. And I did so much of it that, I got to a space where people started going to talk to her because she's worked in this type of nonprofit and she's done international. And, and so it was my experience. But your generation now has degrees, undergraduate and master's and PhD programs that didn't even exist when I was younger. So that makes a difference, because of access. And I don't think sometimes older people recognize that it's just different, and the world that you're in is different. And why would I be jealous of you? There's no reason to. I should be proud of you and supporting you, and helping you get to places that may not have been an option for me at that time. But again, it's mindset. I think people have to have a certain level of confidence and in knowing of themselves to be able to help other people. It requires you to be grounded in you, especially when you're helping them to possibly do more than you are doing.
Yeah.
You got to be okay with you to do that, because for a lot of people it's like, well, I'm good with helping you if it keeps you there, because then I'm able to go, look at me, I'm a good person. But what does it look like when I help you and you might exceed and excel better than I have? For a lot of people, that's uncomfortable because their identity is then challenged and they don't want that.
That is deep. That is very deep, very deep. It is close to home, but so community building, what does that look like and why do we need it? Because I really want to know what you think community building is.
Community building is really simplified, looking at ways to make things better where we live, where we work, where we play. And so it requires, as I mentioned earlier, I think before you do any kind of community building, you got to know your assets. You got to know what already exists in the community, whether it's the places that are there or whether it's the people. And I think you have to identify those assets, because what happens quite often is we'll start creating stuff and then look up and go, oh no, I didn't know there was one of those down the street. Uh-oh. And so now you created, two of the same things that need the same resource, when what would it look like if they had known the other was there and they could have collaborated and built something even bigger. So I think community building is really about looking at ways that we can bring everybody's talent, their treasure. It's kind of like in the work of Kretzmann and McKnight, they talk about the head, the heart, and the hand. How do you make sure that everybody is bringing their heads, what's in their heart, what's in their hands to the table to really transform the way our communities look? And that's knowing what exists with people. We got to bring out, talent and see what's there. And when we do that, everybody can contribute. I don't think that there is not one person who doesn't have something that can be used. And we got to stop looking at our communities and people, again, from a deficit standpoint, and begin to start seeing the assets and gifts and talents that everybody brings to the table. And when we use all of those things, we can make some stuff happen.
So the community development. Now, to me, based on what I can brief, community building and community development sound alike. Can you tell us if there are any differences and what is community development?
Well, I think community development is the whole process of doing community building. I think building can be, from a programmatic standpoint that, we're coming in and we're working together on a project. I think they're very similar. Community development to me is the entire process of how do you holistically transform a community. And community development takes time. It's something that, World Vision, where I used to work, they said for them to go into a community, it would take about 20 years for them to really begin to measure impact. I think community development, even if you're talking about activism, you have to be committed to the long haul. You can't just come in and protest, and then go, I've done my piece. It is this long-term commitment to change, and developing our communities, it requires time, because just like you take a baby at birth, by the time they're 18 years old or even 20, there's some knowledge that they're going to have that they didn't have at 2 years old. Communities are the same way, that they go through growth cycles and maturation, and we have to be aware that that is going to happen, that there is ebb and flow because of the economy or leadership changes. And so community development is paying attention to all those dynamics in a community, but focusing on the long-term good of it. How do you transform it, taking it from that baby at zero, and really working together and building the talents and bringing resources in, utilizing existing resources to move a community to wherever it is it's trying to go. And that takes time. It's not something, if you get in these spaces, I tell folks all the time, this is not a space that's for the faint of heart. It is for people that are going to be here for the long term, because change You know, you can see some little incremental things happen, but it takes time for change to really occur, and you can't give up. You got to keep doing the work.
Okay. So community initiatives. I think that it's important that we all be aware of community initiatives because we are all in some way shaping our community. And I know that our ancestors believe in this firmly, but I know they lived in a sort of different climate than we do now. But what is the importance of community initiatives?
Well, I think, you know, just as you talk about community development and the long-term transformation, I think that there has to be this short-term piece of projects and things that are happening at the same time, because those projects contribute to the long-term work. So
Okay.
these initiatives, you know, are probably shorter term projects that may be something that you could do for a month. It could be something you do for a day. Those
Okay.
things like a feeding, and you're going out and you're feeding people that are hungry. That
Yes.
doesn't necessarily lead to community change, but it's an initiative to make sure that people's short-term needs are taken care of. In
Yes.
communities, you have to have both. You can't just focus on, we're going to just do policies, you know, and do long-term policy work. What folks don't have food.
Immediate needs.
You got to do immediate,
Right.
and that's why those initiatives are important. And I always tell my daughter this: be careful, because as a society, we always live in this space of either or. That it has
Okay.
to be either this or either that. No, 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 because both and can exist at the same time. You have to have these community initiatives and these projects that are going on so people can eat. We know that feeding you once a week is not going to solve for hunger, but it's going to solve for immediate need. And at the same time, though, we need to start dealing with systems and policies and things so that we can make sure that you're not always having to come here and get something to eat, that we solve that problem. Both of those have to happen at the same time, and we cannot value one over the other. And I think we spend so much time going, well, it's either this one or this one. No, if we really want change, we have to do them both.
And that takes commitment.
Commitment, determination, and it's knowing that you may not have an answer, and it's being okay with that, that you may actually get into something, you go, oh, I didn't know this was going to turn out like this. How do we learn? And it's creating these spaces for feedback loops where we're constantly learning and then taking what we learn and applying it to change it. And so often we wait for community initiatives and we wait 3 years down the line to evaluate it when we knew it was a mess day one. But we didn't create these feedback loops and spaces for people to speak into it. And had we done that and done check-ins more often, we could have course corrected and communities could look very different.
Now, as we speak about communities, now we know that there are many causes that can cause, we talked about division amongst communities, but I do think the isolated individuals, and then you think about technology. So do you think there's a possibility that though we have technology and in many ways it has bridged certain gaps, do you think that it can also feed that isolation trap?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think technology gives us the opportunity to be something that we're not. So I can get up on Facebook and put up things about my vacations and things like that, and create spaces where, you know, people don't feel that they can be authentic because I didn't go on that kind of vacation, you know, and so you can see people putting on facades of being something that they're not, that creates this disconnection because people aren't being authentic.
Okay.
And so it as much as technology can be great and it can do community building, there is this dark side of technology that we have to be aware of, that we know that in young people, studies have shown that, you know, a lot of young folks are even more depressed now because of technology, because people don't like my picture. You know, I don't get the comments that someone has. So it creates this comparison piece that can be very dangerous for your self-image. And I think it's being aware of that. And it can also create, as I mentioned, spaces where people are not authentic because people are creating spaces to compete and to show what I have compared to you don't have this, or I'm happy. I want you to see how happy I am when I'm not telling you I'm really not, but I want you to believe that. And so I think that as great as it is, I think we have to also be careful of the negative side and helping people understand that your approval can't be in the likes that you get. Your approval can't be in, how many times somebody retweets your post. I think your approval has to come from you. And that is much more important for your mental health than what other people say about you online. And we have to just be mindful of the damage that it can create.
So if it's fine, Dr. Drew, I now want us to shift and talk about what it takes to be a keynote speaker, author, and leader. Because in many ways, even these different areas can lead to creating a better state within networks, families, and communities. So think back to your childhood or when you were an adolescent, which I know you spoke about college. Did you know then that your calling was to be a community leader with so much impact, playing a significant role in community development? You did it.
Not at all. I knew from a little girl I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to be a doctor.
Right.
But I thought it was a physician. And I could not get through AP biology. I finally, did what I needed to pass. But I initially thought I was going to go into microbiology. I wanted to be in somebody's closet and doing research because I was fascinated with the ability to help people. But I knew there was this common thread of I wanted to help. When I went to undergrad, I thought I was going to be an attorney, and I was a history pre-law major. And my junior year of college, I went to UT's law school to do some research for a paper I was doing for a conference. And I saw law students on a Saturday and they looked miserable. And one came up to me and he was like, listen, if you want your life to look like this, then come do this. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to, y'all look horrible. And I changed my mind. And so life is one of these things where it's going to change. You may have an idea about what you want to do. And if you're a person of faith, you have to believe that God orders your steps. And so all the stuff that you go through, God uses. It's no accidental coincidence when things happen. And even those painful things, God can use that to change your life and even help other people's lives. And so I had to learn as I got older that God was building this map for me. And at the time, it made no sense. I was working in certain places and I was like, why? And now I can sit back and go, now I understand why I had to do that, because I couldn't do this if that hadn't happened. So I tell folks all the time, trust the process. I think when you're young, you so quickly want to accelerate and get the titles and make all the money. But the problem in doing that is that how do you sustain it? Mm-hmm. There are certain things that you have to go through, and that's not to say you won't get it young, but there are certain experiences that you only get through living. No degree is going to give you certain life experiences. You just have to live. And I tell my child that yeah, you might be almost 20, but sweetie, you haven't lived long enough. There's some things that you just got to go through that it's not your fault. You just haven't been here long enough. And I look at my mother and the experiences that she has, and she'll tell me stuff. And I'm like, how do you know that? She's lived. And so enjoy the process. The process is not fun. It doesn't feel good, but learn all you can, because God uses all of that stuff to get you to where you ultimately going to end up. And you could have never told me at 18 years old that I'd be doing what I'm doing now. But I'm grateful and I thank God for it. I am blessed.
Okay. Thank you for sharing with us how you became the woman you are now, doing the work that you do, because it's interesting to hear you say that, because I do think, I think it's kind of I think somehow it gets instilled within us, because I know achievement is important to us and being, accomplishments. But sometimes, like you said, we have to evaluate, why are we racing? Like, why are we trying to get to this? Life is not a deadline, you're supposed to live. But I do think sometimes we find ourselves in that boat of we're kind of we're not focusing enough on enjoying the process.
No, you know, Iyanla Van Zandt has a quote. I put it up, and she said, "Comparison is an act of," and I'm paraphrasing. It's an act of self-abuse, so to speak. You
Okay.
have to be careful of comparing yourself to other people, because you'll look at other people's success and go, well, so and so is here, well, why can't I be there? I should be able to do that. And what you don't know is what people go through to get there. So when you understand their process, you might look and go, yeah, I don't know if I want to go through all of that to get to that. There is a time and place and space for all of us. And I tell my staff this all the time: just do the work, be committed to you. It's not about the title, it is the legacy. What is it that you want to create that when you're gone, people can point to that body of work, and that body of work may be people, that folks' lives are better because you existed. That doesn't happen overnight. It is being consistent in doing the work, and it's being okay that it may change. What you may have as a vision and what you think you may do could change, and that's not bad. But it's being open to the possibility that things could look different than what you expected them to. And again, if you trust God and believe that God is the author and finisher of your faith, then you got to know that God has it already set up for you from the time you were in the womb. Your life was already designed for you, and it was designed for your goodness, and in my opinion, your greatness. Because how does God get glorified if your life is tore up? I mean, I'm not saying that in the sense that people, you know, are going to have money, and people look at success in weird ways. Success isn't necessarily always equated to having money. But if you're not happy and you're miserable, how does that glorify who God is? So God wants you to be your best, your greatest self. And that takes a process in doing it. And there's going to be some pitfalls. There are going to be some downfalls. It's going to be some pain. It's going to be some crying. I can tell you about that. But what I will say is that even when those things happen, God has a way of still using that stuff for your good. And it ends up changing not only your life, but the people's lives around you, if you choose to see it that way. If you choose to see all the things that happen as, oh, this is horrible, my life is horrible, you're going to keep getting more of that stuff. Once you start seeing this as, these are opportunities for me to grow and to be a better person so I can learn and not have to do this again, watch what God can do. He's just amazing. I won't preach. I'm going to stop. I'll start preaching.
So this has been a wonderful conversation, and I am so thankful to have had you. So before we end this podcast, though, I would love if you could share with all leaders, mentors, and teachers helpful tips and encouragement as they try to thrive amidst a pandemic. These people are very influential in the lives of others, and we do count on them. So if you have any words of encouragement.
Yeah, connect to your purpose and passion. I think God has put us on pause in this season. When in your lifetime have you ever seen the world completely come to a stop?
Right.
I mean, you've never seen that. I don't know if we'll ever see it again. And yet this is such an opportunity to go back and think about those dreams that you've had and begin to connect to making those dreams a reality. How do you pour into yourself? Is it reading more and taking classes online and webinars? Using this time to develop the purpose and passion that God has for you is going to be critical, because when we come out of this, you got to be ready for what's next. And a lot of us are using this as time just to kind of figure it out. This is a time for you to plan and strategize and do some things, because when we do get through this, the world is not going to be as we know it. And you have an opportunity now to prepare what you want the other side to look like. And you can do that in this season. Use the time wisely.
Powerful. So, are there any last words or comments you may want to share, or we've?
I'm good. I don't want to start preaching, but I appreciate the opportunity. I love your podcast and what you're doing. And I want to encourage you to continue, you know, having these very powerful, deep, difficult conversations and bringing in people that are older and younger to share, because I think that those conversations are missing right now. And we need more of those. So continue the good work you're doing.
I am so thankful to hear that, to hear that you're encouraging me and that you love my podcast, because this just came about in so many ways. It doesn't seem like long ago when I started, but I'm just thankful for where God has took it, and I'm thankful to have you on the show. And your resume, again, like I said, is incredible. So, so again, Dr. Drew, I am so honored that you were a guest on the MR podcast today, and you were nothing short of amazing.
Thank you.
With all words being finished, and I hope that everyone listening enjoyed this podcast. We talked about multiple topics, but I hope that you enjoy this podcast. And this is the MR podcast. Dr. Drew, would you like to tell the those listening where they can reach you, like social medias and stuff like that?
So my email is info@drfroswa, which is FROSWA.com. You can go to my website at drfroswa.com. Okay. I'm on Instagram. I just got on Instagram at Dr. Froswa. I'm one of those old folks who just decided to get on it. But it's easy to find me, and I do respond.
That is great. And that is how you all can contact her or see the wonderful work that she is doing and hear more about her, as well as publish one of her books, which I mentioned earlier. So this is the MR podcast. We have just completed another dope episode with the one and only Dr. Drew. Thank you for listening.